Today we're here in Northumberland in this lovely weather, up on the moor side, and we're collecting heather to be used for Joe the Quilter's cottage, which will be heather thatch. It'll be a really good example of a vernacular building, which is heather thatch. It was a common traditional method here in Northumberland and in County Durham. We're going to take the heather back to Beamish, where we're going to learn to thatch with a master thatcher in preparation for the building of the cottage.
Right, welcome to Blue Mill Moor near Rothbury. This is the location in which we're cutting the heather for your project at Beamish. The heather here is about 12 years old, which is very important because it needs to be of a certain age, otherwise it becomes very woody and it begins to fall over. I was introduced to heather and heather thatching about 10 years ago by a friend of mine, John Letts, who is an archaeobiologist. He specialises in the archaeology of old thatched roofs, and I was able to introduce him to some people around here regarding heather, and since then I've become involved with it, and also through the thatcher who is going to be doing your job, William Taggartmeyer, who's a very experienced thatcher. The process we use here is obviously something that we've had to make up in the 21st century. Our ancestors did it in a very different way. They almost certainly hand pulled the heather. As you can imagine, that must have been a very laborious way of doing things. But we are reasonably convinced that they did it as a village activity. So they came up here as a large group with a cart and a horse, probably 20, 30, 40, 50 people at a time, and they pulled the heather. And I would think it was an annual event because heather roofs are quite prone to pests like squirrels, jackdaws, animals, birds, all eating away at the heather, and what you've got essentially is a decomposing pile of compost, okay, which is on a 60-degree angle. It's a steeper pitch than a reed roof or a straw roof, and that all filters down slowly over time, some of it in the way that reed and straw dispatches water in a flowing action, but a lot of it over time, over 100, 200 years, through just soaking down through the whole thing. This then hits a dripstone at the top of the wall and then runs down the outside wall. So some will drip off and as a traditional roof, but a lot of it will just seep down over time. The way we use now here is, you can probably hear in the background there, there's a brush cutter going with a metal blade on, and the cutter, in this case, he's been doing this for some years now, and he's developed a technique where he can actually put it into a row, right, almost in one direction, which makes it much easier for the pickers to pick it up, because when you pick it up you've got to get it all in one, again, in a single direction. You don't want it all a mismatch. You don't want the fronds at one end and the stalks at another. You want it all lying in one direction. And so that's the challenge to the pickers, is to make sure you gather it in such a way that it's all lying in one way like that. We then stack that up into large piles, which you can see around here, and then we bale it. And quality control is a little variable because it depends on what you get up in your arms, but we're also in some ways restricted by the straps, that the length of the straps that we have. You can use string. We've tried using string in the past, but it's very, very time consuming making all the strings and fiddling on trying to get them round, and we found that putting a couple of ties together is a much quicker, easier way, and you can get a lot of force into binding it together, so you get more value for your money, really, in that sense, from the thatcher's point of view. We then trim the ends, because as you know, heather is all very straggly and erratic, and to give it some sort of conformity, and then we stack it in bin bags, and we've been aiming to get 15 in each bin bag, and you're welcome to go through all the bin bags. There's 15 in each one. I know that for a fact. We then tie them in bags and we put them together in pairs, and then a telehandler comes up here, and drives all the way up here and picks up 2 at a time and takes them back down to a very large trailer down on the forest road, and then they're taken away to a farm about 5 miles from here, and they're stacked in an old hemmel, because all the farmers are putting their animals out onto the fields at the moment because the grass is starting to grow, and then it's all stored there, and then it's going to be transported to Beamish for your use, and William Taggart-Meyer will then take over from there, and he'll thatch with it. So it's quite straightforward for him to just pick up a bundle, cut the ties, put it on the roof, and away you go. The beauty of this is, although this looks like some scene from Dante's Inferno, it's actually, in 7 years, it's become like that. So it's fully sustainable. It's absolutely, the farmer, the landowner who owns this, is absolutely thrilled with what we're doing, and I can't emphasize that enough. You can see the areas that we've taken off, but this is evidence of the fact that it comes back just as strong, if not stronger, and so it's a very good way of sustaining the environment.
Hello, I'm Richard Young. I'm 64 years old. I'm retired, and I'm a volunteer on the Joe the Quilter cottage project. I first got involved about 2 years ago when the archaeology started. I'm a veteran of volunteer archaeology. I've been involved in a number of projects since I retired, and when they were looking for local volunteers in the area of Joe's cottage, well, I jumped at the chance, having looked at buildings like Joe's cottage for about the last 30 years. I'm hoping to be involved with a lot more of the construction at the museum. Here we are collecting heather for the thatch, for the roof of the building, and I'm hoping to be involved with some of the masonry work and the timber work as well. So I'm looking forward to following the project through over the next year or two.
I'm William Taggart-Meyer, I'm 69, I'm from Scarborough, and I'm a full-time thatcher. Have been for 40 years next year. Beamish approached me to ask me about thatching this project, Quilter's Cottage. I'm one of the few thatchers actually in the country who's had any experience with heather, having been in the north and having done about 24 heather buildings prior to this one. I mean, I'm using similar techniques that I normally use with straw, because I'm primarily a straw thatcher. I have to say I've done a couple of dozen heather roofs, so I'm using similar sort of fixings, but here we're quite keen to use, and it's difficult to research what the original fixings would have been, but we're compromising in some ways. I'm using what I think is the right way. There's very, very little thing about thatch. Obviously, it wears out, it disappears, you know, and there's not much historical evidence of it, so it's hard to research, you know, details. So we're tying it on. You've had it bundled up and brought to the site, tying it on and screwing it down the same way as it would have been in the old days. Well, where Joe Quilter's cottage was originally, there was all heather thatching. It's the most common source material up there. There's no straw, well, very little wheat grown in that area as far as I know. No reed, which are the other two main materials. So heather was the obvious choice. It would have been used a lot in that time. Well, earlier on, I gave a talk with my photographs and brought all the tools in one of the buildings down the road there. We had a couple of dozen people listening to me and showing them all the different materials, like the reed and the heather, different techniques and so on, and looking at photographs. And then today we've come down so that people can have a hands-on, have a real go at actually doing it, and also we're hoping that when I've done the roof, there will be people at the museum who know how a thatch roof is put together, who actually work here, so they can keep their eye on it and maintain it, which I think is a great idea, not having to get the thatcher in all the time if anything goes wrong. You know?